Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Is cosmetic nursing your glamorous new career? Our presenter today is Elisa O'Keefe. Elisa is a health industry pioneer, a highly experienced clinician and educator, and was the first nurse practitioner in the ACT. She is also the lead author of the first ever Australian standards and scope of practice document for cosmetic nursing and is often called on for comment in the industry. The award-winning company Bravura Education was born when, during her 4 years in cosmetic medicine practice, she realised there was a need for flexible, high-quality, postgraduate, continuing professional development for health professionals with regard to lasers and other light-based therapies. Elisa lives in Canberra with her surveyor husband, 2 fun and interesting adult children, and a spoodle, a moggy, and a pond full of goldfish. Elisa, welcome to the microphone.
Hi and welcome, and Sue, thank you for that beautiful introduction. I'm working from the home office today, so my surveyor husband's interstate, the 2 adult children are out of the house, but the moggy and the spoodle are here with me, so let's hope that they behave themselves. Well, welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be talking to you about this today. There's quite a bit of misinformation about cosmetic nursing out there, and one of the things that happens is it gets kind of lost in the whole landscape. You know, aged care, mental health, emergency departments all seem to hog the limelight, and look, so they should. But what we're needing to have more and more is a discussion about what cosmetic nursing is and whether it's a career that you might like to move into. I get inquiries all the time from people asking, saying things like, I'm in an emergency department, I'm really burnt out, I'm looking for something else, or I've had a family, I'd like to start a business at home, how can I get into this area? And look, it's a really difficult area to navigate. So what I wanted to do with you this morning is just step through some of the key components of cosmetic nursing, some that are similar to what you're used to and some that are a little bit different. I'm happy to take questions as we go along, but we'll spend a little bit of time at the end with questions as well. So you get an opportunity to just, ask anything that you like pretty much. So what are we going to cover today? Today we're going to look at the context of practice for cosmetic nursing. Now, we're going to look at scope of practice as well. Cosmetic nursing is way more than injecting dermal fillers and muscle relaxants. So I wanted to really flesh out the kind of things that you'll see if this is a career path that you're choosing. I also want to cover the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Australia position on cosmetic nursing and just touch on the current Medical Board of Australia guidelines with this as well. The other thing that's happening is that the 2004 Lasers in Health standards, which cover Australia and New Zealand, are being revamped, and we're expecting that the new standards will be out in probably the first quarter of this year. Just wanted to give you the heads up about some of the things that are happening around there. Wanted to talk to you about whether cosmetic nursing is recognised as a specialty or not. Introduce you to the standards and scope of practice for cosmetic nursing. This is a fantastic document. If you'd like a copy of the document, look, please let me know. There's contact details at the end of this session, but it's also available on one of the blogs on our website, so you're welcome to have a look at that. I wanted to talk about postgraduate education and experience. What do you need to start to transition into this area? What CPD would be expected of you, and some of the support networks that are around to support your career in cosmetic nursing. So the context of cosmetic nursing practice. So sometimes cosmetic nurses are working in collaboration with their medical colleagues. So this would be with cosmetic physicians, plastic surgeons or dermatologists. And historically, the nurses that have moved into cosmetic nursing have been ones that have already been working for a plastic surgeon. And as the technology has improved and the scopes of services provided have evolved, there's been more and more of a place for nurses and other non-medical staff to be working in this area. They can work in private or public healthcare sectors. They can be in nurse-led clinics, so where the nurses own the businesses, or they can work independently in private practice. So they can be, for example, doing an outreach service or working for themselves. They can be going into, say, beauty therapy, facilities. There's all sorts of ways they can work. And I would like to point out at this point, I've popped an asterisk next to independently because none of us truly work independently. We actually work collaboratively, and that's the way it is. So whilst I've called it independent, it's actually collaborative practice. So scope of practice, and this is nothing unusual for nurses already. We know that our scope of practice, or what we actually feel competent and confident in doing, is influenced by our education, our training, our practical experience and competence. And it's authorised by what the employer's organisation policies and requirements are. Ultimately, the boundaries of our scope of practice are defined by how the confidence we have in our own capabilities, legislation and regulation. So from person to person, this is quite different, and it's always an evolving thing as well, scope of practice. The Nursing and Midwifery Board on the provision of cosmetic nursing procedures is really quite an interesting document in that it's extremely generic. Something that I feel has been lost in the last few years with regard to cosmetic nursing and the cosmetic industry as a whole is the fact that the procedures that we are performing and the types of clientele and patients that we are seeing are exactly the same as we would see in any other setting. So the genericism of this statement is that it doesn't matter where you work, whether it be in cosmetic medicine, emergency department, intensive care, out in an Aboriginal community, the standards and the quality of care that we expect from a nurse is exactly the same. And look, I don't need to tell those people listening that there's been a huge amount of media attention around cosmetic medicine and cosmetic surgery. And look, it's unlikely to change that scrutiny either. There's some people who aren't maintaining the rigorous standards that we would expect of health professionals. And interestingly enough, it's not just the registered health professionals that are responsible for maintaining that high standard, but anybody who's delivering a health service is equally responsible. So what I would encourage you to do is go and have a look at this position statement and just revel in it because it's quite generic, and that no matter where you work, you're still held to the same account. So what do we expect with regard to professional standards? It's the same. We expect that you would work as a registered nurse, whether you be enrolled, registered or a nurse practitioner, that you will follow the code of conduct, that you would maintain professional boundaries, that you would work to the code of ethics, which I might just add has recently been updated, so please go and have a look at that. There's some very stringent guidelines for advertising regulated health services. This is the same for cosmetic medicine. So there's things that you can and can't say around advertising. You can't upsell, for example, to things that a patient might not need. It's an excellent document, the guidelines. There's a national framework for developing your scope of practice and your confidence and your competency. It's a flowchart from the Nursing and Midwifery Board. It makes it really quite clear how to evolve your career from where you are to where you want to be. So you need to do a stock take of where you are, have a bit of a short-term goal and a long-term goal of what your vision is of where you'd like to be, and then start to plot what the training, education and experience you're going to need to move into that. As a cosmetic nurse, you will still be working within the state and territory drugs and poisons legislation, and you will also be expected to work under local policies, procedures and guidelines. So, as I said, you're still within a high standard of nursing. The medical board guidelines are interesting with regard to cosmetic, medical and surgical procedures because we often think that as nurses that these kinds of documents and standards don't apply to us. However, in speaking to some of my legal colleagues, it seems that if you are called up in front of the board or you have legal proceedings or a complaint made against you, what the lawyers do is they look around to all of your peers, including doctors, including beauty therapists, it wouldn't matter. They look around at what an expected standard of your colleagues and your peers is, which means the lawyers would be seeking information from the medical board. One of the key things that struck me about this document from the medical board is with regard to the treatment of minors for cosmetic procedures. And where this becomes important for nurses is that within the medical guidelines, there's a statement where minors, so under 18s, who are having a procedure are required to have a 7-day cool-off period. So in an industry where sales can be paramount and converting people from potential customers to actual customers can have a significant amount of pressure behind it, I just want you to remember that regardless, you would never push a patient into a decision, but I would particularly point out how important that is for minors. Again, I would encourage you, if you're moving into this area, to have a look at those guidelines before you move across. They're well worth looking at and have some excellent guidelines in there, some of them relevant, some of them not. As I said, the lasers in healthcare standards are changing. Now, these were last written in 2004. A lot has changed. Originally, they were called the Safe Use of Lasers in Healthcare, but you'll notice here the draft standards that have currently been out for consultation and have closed now is the safe use of lasers and intense light sources in healthcare. So what we see now is some standards that not just cover lasers but cover intense pulse light, LED, but also have the capacity to have the standards set as technology changes. Some of the key things in the revision that I'd like to talk about now is that the onus of education is not just on, it's very similar to what we do with workplace health and safety across the board. The onus for safety, education and competence is across the board. So anyone that is a provider is obliged to ensure that staff have appropriate training. Anyone who engages with or uses laser or IPL equipment is expected to be trained. And we are also seeing a necessity within this for organisations to have policies and procedures that thoroughly step through what is expected with regard to education, training, and then a competency assessment. So we're seeing more rigour in the progression through to be able to independently use lasers and intense pulse lights within scope of practice. Whilst laser and IPL users are expected to work within standards, something that I would say about that is that standards are nice to do, not have to do. And I get asked this question all the time and people say to me, well, it's not mandatory. Why would you adhere to the standards? And to that, I would say it is nice to do until you have a complaint made against you. And then what you're wanting to be able to do to defend yourself is to be able to say that you adhere to the standards, because that is your safety net. The standards, all of these policies, procedures, guidelines, all of this documentation I'm presenting for you today is your safety net for you to be able to put your hand on your heart and say that you did everything that you could to be able to practice what you're doing. So whilst this one is in relation to lasers, there's no similar document at the moment around injectables of muscle relaxants and dermal fillers. No standards, but as I said before, it would be exactly the same principles as what you would use for any other procedure. So whether you were giving an IV infusion or an intramuscular injection or, a local anaesthetic, the principles are exactly the same. So what's expected under the standards with regard to laser and intense pulse light training? And intense pulse light, LED laser are the three key things that we see in cosmetic medicine. So the things that the standards expect that we will know before we fire a laser is basic light physics, light safety, how laser interacts with tissue, the application and doses affecting the use of lasers, so how much you need and what sort of laser you're using, how to operate it correctly, how to set it up, how to monitor your patient, not just intraoperatively, but whilst you're doing a treatment, and the use of all equipment. So the standards are very specific about the things that we need. Who needs training? Anybody who is using a laser. So this includes cosmetic nurses. This is a large part of our scope of practice. Anybody who's responsible for laser safety. Anyone who is a team member around laser, so engineers, technicians, repair people, service personnel, and then incidental personnel. It does state that the examples are students, family members and medical photographers, but anybody who is interacting with lasers should have some education. I had a really interesting experience in New Zealand when I was doing some consultation, and we were doing a procedure with a resurfacing procedure with a CO2 laser, and I was doing some supervision for a nurse. And halfway through the procedure, the receptionist came into the room unannounced with wanting to know what our coffee order might be for morning tea, which first and foremost as inappropriate anyway, but the laser safety ramifications of that using a CO2 laser and having somebody come into the room doesn't bear thinking about. So everybody should have a bit of education and some respect around lasers, no matter who it is in your team. The ARPANSA guidelines on laser safety. ARPANSA is the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency. They're primarily responsible for things like X-ray and radioactive type materials, but under their remit comes non-ionising radiation, lasers and IPL. ARPANSA is currently in the process of putting together a document on national uniformity to look at the minimum education required for lasers, what training will be needed, what terminology we should be using, what equipment is imported, how it's labelled, how we determine what is appropriate equipment and what isn't, how maintenance is done. They're putting together a document on patient care and incident reporting. These guidelines are going to complement the standards and will certainly not contradict it. But again, we're expecting those out this year, so please keep your eyes open. Again, guidelines, they're not mandatory, but you would certainly want to be across them because they're highly protective. So is cosmetic nursing recognised as a specialty? This is a very interesting one. A number of years ago, I co-authored this article in the Australian Nursing Journal called Cosmetic Nursing, Pioneering a Cosmetic Skin Rejuvenation and Aesthetic Nursing Model of Practice, and was quite interested in that journal for them to as the head of specialty nursing. Cosmetic nursing is not recognised in Australia as a specialty. I think at some stage it certainly will. The reason it isn't is that the Nurses and Midwifery Board of Australia recognises the nursing specialty as having its discrete body of knowledge, which we are certainly working on, and secondly, it would generally have some sort of college or association that is supporting it, and I'll come to this later. So at the moment, it's not recognised as a specialty, but we are absolutely evolving, and watch this space. Well, that's what I just said. So the Nursing and Midwifery Board, organisations representing specialty nursing groups in Australia have developed processes for recognising specialty practice, and this provides a sufficient means of acknowledging specialist nursing practice and may be recognised by employers and the health industry at large. One of the things I want to present to you later in this talk today is a new community of interest for cosmetic nursing from the Australian College of Nursing. I would strongly encourage you, if Australian College of Nursing member, to just send them an email to engagement@acn.edu.au and ask to be connected to that community of interest, or if you're not a member of the College of Nursing, to absolutely join. As we progress and evolve with cosmetic nursing, I see that as being one of the key vehicles to develop up this role. We've had some international exposure with regard to cosmetic nursing in Australia, which was a great thing to be involved in. This paper is written by a doctor from the Australasian College of Cosmetic Surgery and I, who assisted in putting together a paper as a response to the Standards and Scope of Practice document, which I'll talk about in depth in a moment. What this allowed us to do was to put out paper on what it is that cosmetic nurses do in Australia, what our scope of practice looks like. Now, you know, because you've been to university, that there's grey literature and there's peer-reviewed literature. Until you actually get something into the peer-reviewed literature, it essentially doesn't exist. So what was really exciting about this was that this Journal of Aesthetic Nursing is an international peer-reviewed journal, and it enabled us to start telling a really strong story about this new area of nursing in Australia. So that was a great thing to be involved in. And those people who know me will know that if you're doing any postgraduate studies, I'm just so excited to hear people interested in publishing, because we need to be publishing more and more what we do. It doesn't have to be necessarily in the peer-reviewed data. When I started as a nurse practitioner back in the mid to early 2000s, one of the things that we did was published in the grey literature, those of us that are new nurse practitioners. So we published in our association magazines, we collaborators with us, so councils or organisations that we were working with. We would publish about the nurse practitioner in their newsletters and things like that. And what that enables you to do is start to build a story, and eventually you can publish, you can research. So please have a think about this, particularly if you're doing postgraduate study. So this is the standards and scope of practice that we developed in 2015. This was authored by the Australasian College of Cosmetic Surgery, who have a significant cohort of nurses as members, and they were wanting to develop up a framework essentially to be able to describe what it was that nurses did. So there was a group of us that were members that were pulled together, and we developed this document. So I'd like to share some of the intricacies of that with you now. It's divided into a number of areas. The first one is the principles of professional practice, and I certainly won't spend much time on this because we've already talked about it in the first part of this seminar. But the principles of professional practice are the facts that nurses work within their usual scope of practice, their APRA requirements, and that no matter where you're working, we're striving for excellence in nursing. So the principles of professional practice for cosmetic nursing are exactly the same no matter where you work. The second section is the principles of clinical practice. Again, this is what we're used to as nurses. So what I want you to take away from this is that cosmetic nursing has so many things in common, and it's more commonality than different. So we know that we need to adhere to the practitioner regulations. I talked briefly about unregistered practitioners before. If you're a person who's not registered with APRA but you're delivering health services, you're required to adhere to the same standards of those who are registered. A lot of unregistered practitioners don't understand this, and in cosmetic nursing you do have a lot of unregistered practitioners as your colleagues. So it's an opportunity to raise the standards of your patient care to what you would expect. Again, you work within safety and quality frameworks, the same as what you would do normally. Same with confidentiality and privacy, obtaining informed consent, and I might mention here too financial consent, and the maintenance of health records, information and privacy are exactly the same. We know that you need to be administering medicines safely and effectively. Now, with registered nurses, they're administering them. With nurse practitioners, it's more complex, and I'll go into that shortly. And with endorsed enrolled nurses, they're administering under supervision. Another principle of clinical practice is utilising medical devices safely and effectively, but also being able to determine with medical devices what is TGA listed and what is an adequate quality machine and what isn't. You're maintaining the principles of infection control, of course, obtaining financial consent, utilising technology-based consultations safely and effectively. As we move to more cloud-based collection of data, we need to be ensuring that the things that we're using that are cloud-based that are actually meeting the privacy for our patients. Cosmetic nurses provide advice and dispense cosmeceuticals or medical grade skincare. This is an essential component of cosmetic nursing, is cosmeceuticals or medical grade skincare, because we know that they enhance the skin health and they also enhance the result that we get from treatments. And we also need to be cautious in introducing new technologies or treatments to ensure that they're in the interest of the patient and that the outcomes and the evidence support it. There's a lot of devices being released all the time. Some are, in the tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some are readily available for not much money from Chinese importers. So you need to be incredibly judicious about what you are using. So there are four domains of practice for cosmetic nurses. The first one is to assess the client, plan and deliver appropriate care. The second one is to administer botulinum toxin A safely and effectively. The third one is administering filler and related products safely and effectively. And the fourth is delivering laser, intense pulse light and related therapies safely and effectively. And I might point out that this document was developed in 2015, the standards and scope of practice. So these domains of practice will probably evolve over time. So the things that we do as cosmetic nurses, and this is very familiar, we perform client care, we administer medication, and we do treatments. So what sorts of things do you do as a cosmetic nurse? Part of it will be wound care, acne management, managing scarring, rosacea, anti-aging and skin fitness, skin sensitivity, sun damage, pigmentation, leg and facial capillaries, removal of unwanted hair, removal of benign skin lesions, skin tightening, fat reduction, and in the case of nurse practitioners, referral to a specialist. This list of client care, of course, will evolve over time as well. Let's talk for a moment about medication. The types of medications that we see in cosmetic nursing are the array of dermal fillers, and there's a huge variety of them. Muscle relaxants or wrinkle relaxants, deoxycholic acid or Belcara, which is to dissolve fat, and other scheduled medicines such as topical anaesthetic, or in the case of nurse practitioners, intradermal local anaesthetic, and nurse practitioners are prescribing medication. There's a lot of discussion about the role of endorsed enrolled nurses in the administration of Schedule 4 medication in cosmetic medicine, cosmetic nursing. What I want to say about endorsed enrolled nurses is, yes, they can administer medication, but they must be under the direct supervision of a registered nurse or a nurse practitioner. Part of the governance arrangements of enrolled nurses is, with regard to the Nursing Midwifery Board, is supervision. They are unable to be supervised solely by a medical officer because they're missing that governance link of having either a registered nurse or a nurse practitioner. So endorsed enrolled nurses must be supervised by a registered nurse or a nurse practitioner and cannot be supervised just by a medical officer. Registered nurses can administer Schedule 4 medication as usual within their scope of practice. And nurse practitioners are authorised to obtain, possess, supply, administer, prescribe and dispense medications. So nurse practitioner roles around medication is across the whole prescribing spectrum. Treatments. So the treatments that we'll see in cosmetic nursing are the use of intense pulse light. So intense pulse light is commonly used for skin rejuvenation, so vascular issues, pigmentation, removal of unwanted hair, and has a slight collagen building effect as well. Cosmetic nurses are using lasers, including but not limited to thulium and erbium, ND-YAG, ruby, alexandrite lasers, and this is evolving all the time. The types of lasers, the technology behind them, changing all the time. We do microdermabrasion, chemical peels, light-emitting diode therapy, radiofrequency therapy, ultrasound therapy, dermal rollering or needling, platelet-rich plasma administration, photodynamic therapy, cosmetic tattooing, tattoo removal, sclerotherapy, lipodissolve and fat reduction. This is a huge scope of practice and a really exciting area to be in. You can make a huge difference doing treatments like this for people. So what are the benefits of having a framework when you're a cosmetic nurse? It sets the standards for what we'd expect of you in an aesthetic context or a cosmetic context. So what it does is it gives you, as I said, a safety net to determine what is within your scope and what isn't. It enables career pathway development. So it enables you to determine what it is that you need to learn to be able to progress your career. You can use it as an audit tool. So you can look at that document and you can recognise what it is within that you already know and are feeling confident and competent about, or what else it is that you'd like to know. So you'll be able to then plan your education to fill in those gaps. And do you remember I talked about the Nursing and Midwifery Board's framework for developing your scope of practice. This is a rigorous way of determining where you're moving in your career. Where it's been used as an audit tool, it can be used for your continuing professional development, and it can also be used for role development, job descriptions and performance evaluation. So this standards and scope of practice is a really great fundamental document to have in your clinic, or one to be totally across before you bridge over from what you're doing currently into being a cosmetic nurse. So now I'd like to share with you some examples of postgraduate education. So the things that are currently available at the moment are accredited laser and IPL safety certificates. Moving into cosmetic nursing, this is probably the fundamental qualification that you're going to need if you're working with lasers. There are continuing professional development modules available, so you're able to learn what you need to know in smaller bites. So if, for example, you wanted to learn something about microneedling, for example, you could do a short course, a couple of days perhaps, in microneedling. Remembering too that a lot of the education that we do is self-driven. There's a lot of private study that goes on, a lot of discussion with peers, listening to podcasts, webinars, there's all sorts of different ways that we can get our postgraduate education. That's not necessarily things that you're paying for. There's a diploma in cosmetic nursing. It's run by the Australasian College of Cosmetic Surgery. There's a graduate diploma in cosmetic nursing, which is run by the Australasian College of Cosmetic Dermal Science and Grey Clay. Then we move to a slightly higher level, which is the university level, and I just want to point out that the first four courses are currently not recognised by any university courses as far as I'm aware. Don't articulate into any university courses. I'm happy to be to talk to somebody if they think this has changed. But the movement into the university sector, cosmetic nursing can be done as part of a community and primary health nursing postgraduate certificate or diploma. It can be done as part of a Master of Clinical Nursing or a Master of Nurse Practitioner. And a lot of the postgraduate education that is provided is industry-based. I would say about industry-based education. So by industry-based, I'm talking about the pharmaceutical companies, cosmeceutical companies, and laser and IPL device sales organisations. I would say just be judicious about what you choose to invest your time in. Some of it is great quality and some of it not so much. So you really do need to be quite discerning about that. So people that can give you postgraduate education experience, they can be professional associations, they can be private providers or RTO. As I said, there's currently no cosmetic nursing university courses, and please choose carefully to make sure that what you're doing is A, going to satisfy what you need, and B, that it's going to articulate into something else, or be transferable from one place to another. As I said, under the new standards, the expected minimum certification for using a laser is a laser safety certificate. Most employers are wanting a 3 to 5 year postgraduate experience. This is really interesting because I see a lot of not cosmetic nursing, I see a lot of young nurses who are new graduates that want to, in their words, I want to get into cosmetic nursing. I've got some concerns about that. I personally think you do need 3 to 5 years of postgraduate experience. Being a cosmetic nurse is so much more than being able to inject a dermal filler or a muscle relaxant into somebody's face. It's incredibly complex. You need an aesthetic eye. You need very good clinical decision-making skills. You need very good clinical judgment. You need to be able to assess skin. You need to be able to recognise skin cancers. You need to be able to recognise things like body dysmorphic disorder, understand the complexities of different health conditions and how they interact with the treatments and the types of technology that you're using. The wonderful thing also about not coming straight into cosmetic nursing out of university is that you need to future-proof your career. So what you want to be able to do is to have as broad base as possible for your nursing career. If you're moving straight from the university into cosmetic nursing, you're missing out on a whole lot of opportunity to learn everything that you've had, to implement everything that you've learned at university with regard to complex health conditions, time management, team interactions, systems, policies, unusual patient presentations, truly understanding the pathophysiology of your patients. The other thing about not coming into cosmetic nursing too quickly as well is that if you're in there and you decide that that's not what you want to do, you're going to want to have some recency of practice to be able to get a job back into the acute care sector. I know that there are some places in Australia where if you've been out of the acute care sector for 3 or more years, you've got to go and do a refresher. So I would strongly encourage you to do some postgraduate experience, preferably a new graduate program if that's possible, but definitely consolidate your university learnings before you move across into a specialty. I would say on-the-job training is really common in cosmetic nursing, and it's a great way to learn, particularly for machinery. Machinery is unique from place to place. So whilst I would strongly advocate doing a laser safety certificate with regard to laser and IPL, there's about 200 odd providers of cosmetic lasers listed with the TGA. You certainly can't be across all 200 of those. What we want you to do is to be absolutely au fait with the one that you've got in your own clinic. The same can be said of cosmeceuticals. There's a huge variety of cosmeceuticals that are implemented into clinics. I would say to you with regard to cosmeceuticals, it's all about the ingredients. It's not about the brand. It's about what the ingredients can do, how much is in them, and whether they're going to be absorbed by the skin. So it's a good way to learn on the job too about the cosmeceuticals that you're using. CPD. So CPD for nurses we know is 20 hours per year, but nurse practitioners need to have an additional 10 related to the endorsement, and that extra 10 for nurse practitioners is with regard to medications. We know that 1 hour of active learning equals 1 hour of CPD. I used to work at the Australian College of Nursing as the senior nurse advisor, and one of the questions I would get all the time was, how do I determine what my 1 hour of CPD or my 20 hours, how do I determine what they are? A lot of people seem to think that those 20 hours have to be actually paid hours, or like where you're paying for a course or when you're being sent somewhere by your employer to learn. But your 20 hours can be anything that you like that is a high level of education. It can be an hour spent reading a journal article on rosacea or, female alopecia. It can't be reading Vogue or Harper's Bazaar about, what's gone wrong in the cosmetic industry, because of course, that's not necessarily quality clinical information. But if you're reading peer-reviewed journals, you're doing some self-directed learning, as long as you can defend the fact that it's quality, that's absolutely fine. CPD must be relevant to the nurse's context of practice. Something I would say about that though is it's not necessarily your current context of practice. It can be where you're planning to go in your future. You need to keep written documentation of your CPD. The Nurses Board audits a percentage of nurses every year. I think it's 15% of them. So at some stage you can be expected to be contacted by the board to just show what your CPD has been. And people ask me whether CPR, manual handling, can be included as part of your CPD, and the answer is yes, it can. Again, with regard to cosmetic nursing, we would be expecting that you would be doing annual CPR training. You would probably be doing comprehensive first aid training every 3 years. You would be doing manual handling training, infection control. So there's the things that you would usually do that you would still be expected to be completing. Your CPD, if you do get audited, they're going to ask you about what your learning needs were and how you decided what CPD you were going to do. They have to be relevant, so I've talked about that already. And there needs to be a section on reflection. So after you've done your learning, you'll need to document and it's usually just 3 things: what you've learned and how that's going to change your practice. So it's a full quality cycle, actually. So I said I'd talk to you about the Australian College of Nursing and the Cosmetic Nursing Community of Interest. So it's newly established. I am the current chair of it and only found out about that a couple of weeks ago. So I'm really excited to be heading up this group into the future. So what does this mean? So what it means is we have a huge opportunity now to come together as a group and to determine what the future of cosmetic nursing might look like. The standards and scope of practice document is 3 years old now. I'd be really interested in working with a group of you to be able to check whether it's still relevant and to enhance it should we need to. I'm really interested for us to put together a database or a wiki of what education is available for cosmetic nursing and put that together to make it really easy for cosmetic nurses to get the education and the training that they need. There's a section in that community of interest where we can communicate with one another, share pearls of wisdom, ask for advice, get support from the college so we can work on lobbying or any political type things that we might need to do, whether we need to look at changing influencing the change for legislation or policy. There's a real opportunity to have a critical mass of cosmetic nurses. There's also an opportunity here to enhance the recognition as a specialty. Those of you who've heard me speak about cosmetic nursing before, I talk about how passionate I am about publication. The other thing I'm passionate about is a collaboration and being a critical mass to be able to share what we know and to be able to raise the standards of cosmetic nursing and nursing and essentially patient care across the board. There's a few great networks that are around and we all know and love Facebook, and Facebook's getting better and better legs. Some of the ones that I would just point out to you that if you're not a member already, you might like just consider joining the groups. There's the Cosmetic Aesthetic and Skincare Nurses Group, Aesthetic Nurses of Australia, Laser Therapists Australia and Laser Safety Australia, and the Round Table for Nurse Injectors. These are fantastic groups. Really robust conversations, lots of pearls of wisdom are exchanged, lots of questions from nurses who are wanting to transition. So there's different types of advice that young nurses will be getting about moving into cosmetic nursing, recommendations for courses that other people have done, a really fantastic network. So I'd encourage you to join one of these if you're not in it already, one or more actually. So what are the future opportunities for cosmetic nursing? I think we have barely begun to scratch the surface of what's possible. And one of the key things that we need to do is really establish what it is that we do within cosmetic nursing. Those that know me and have heard me speak before, I'm passionate about research. I'm constantly doing research, and I would also encourage any of you, particularly if you're engaged in postgraduate study, to be publishing what you do. I would encourage postgraduate university-based education, and you can absolutely finesse that to suit your area of interest. We need a consistent communication platform. We know that the more unified we are, the more likely we are to move forward as a specialty, and I would again strongly encourage you to become a member of the College of Nursing if you're not already, and if you are already, come and become a part of the community of interest. I would like to see the continual development of accredited education initiatives that demonstrate a valid career pathway and articulate into a suite of postgraduate knowledge and skills. We can't do this unless we research it. We really need to start to describe what it is that cosmetic nurses need to do in a very rigorous way to move from one specialty over to this one. Nobody really has articulated what that might look like, so we've got a lot of work to do around that. We need to rejuvenate the professional practice standards and scope of practice, only because they were the first and they were in 2015, and we need to look at them to see whether they're relevant and whether they are visionary as well. We need platforms for sharing industry trends and changes in clinical practice, and we need to be lobbying the government to ensure that we are constantly delivering great patient outcomes. So we need a voice at the table. So thank you. We might take questions now, but look, if you've got questions or you would you'd like to have a chat to me about your career, or anything that you've listened to today that you'd like to know more about, you can contact me directly on my email address there, or you can call the office on 1300 001 808. And please, if you loved listening to this, we would love it if you would share or like, and spread the word to anyone else who you think might benefit from having a listen today. So thanks very much.
Elisa, thank you. A very interesting presentation. Now, if you are attending the session live and you would like to pose a question to Elisa, all you need to do is click on the question mark icon, and a box will display for you. Type the question into there and click send, and that will go through to Elisa. As Elisa said, though, if you are watching it as a recording, then her contact details are there. So, Elisa, interesting discussion in regards to cosmetic nursing. So, I know that there's an association of dermatology nursing. So, what's the difference between a cosmetic nurse and a dermatology nurse?
So, thanks, Sue. There's more in common than there isn't. So the I think it's the Australasian Society of Dermatology Nurses.
Mm.
Their genesis has originally been working with dermatologists, with the usual scope of practice of dermatology. But as the cosmetic area has grown and has evolved into injectables and medical grade skincare and lasers and other light therapies, the dermatology nurse's scope of practice has grown into that area. But so similarly, so has the plastic surgery nurses. So there's quite a bit of crossover, and so there's actually more in common with groups like that than there is differences.
So nurses working within that practice would also then benefit from the Facebook groups that you identified, the courses that are available, the education that Bravura provides.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, the dermatology nurses have been absolute pioneers in this area because they were the first implementers.
Yes, certainly. We have a conference for dermatology nurses, and from my understanding of the nurses that I've been speaking to, some of which who have worked in the field for many years, like their scope of practice from where it started, 15, 20 odd years ago to where they find themselves now is amazing. It's the knowledge required to work within those practices is exceptionally specialised and certainly quite complex.
And I'd strongly encourage anybody that was planning to shift careers into cosmetic nursing to consider a conference such as that for a number of reasons. One is that the coverage of cosmetic presentations is usually very evident. But the other thing that the dermatology nurses do extremely well is skin pathology and skin health. And so they're totally across assessing skin, identifying pathophysiology, unusual skin presentations. So their knowledge, their underpinning knowledge of skin is incredible.
And the courses that Bravura provides, Elisa, can I do some of those in an online format?
You can. So for cosmetic nursing, we've got a couple of pathways. The first one is that you would start with your laser certification, so your laser safety certificate in cosmetic medicine. This is online, this particular one, and it takes approximately 8 hours. It's designed so that people can come and go and learn at their own pace. It gives them the ability to really digest all of the lecture material, the supportive clinical papers, videos, and other things within that learning management system. We also deliver that face-to-face as well throughout Australia, so please have a look at our website. We also deliver that laser safety in classroom style. But there's then 2 ways you can go after you've done your baseline certification. You can either take a pathway into an advanced course where you can do a course where you have access to really high-level clinical information on how to assess, treat and take care of patients with requirements like hair reduction, vascular conditions, hyperpigmentation, resurfacing and rejuvenation of skin, skin tightening, fat reduction, photodynamic therapy and tattoo removal. So you can do that as an advanced course, or if you want to break that down into smaller bites, each of those topics is available as a short CPD course as well.
So that's excellent.
Yes, we're very proud of our courses. The genesis of Bravura was that when I worked within Skin Clinic a number of years ago, it's more than 8 years ago now, I looked around at the education for nurses and doctors who were transitioning from, all sorts of areas into cosmetic medicine, and I just didn't feel that the education was of high enough quality, and I thought, you know what, I think we can do this better. And so what we've got is what I believe is the best quality laser and light-based therapy education in Australia.
Certainly, because from what I'm seeing as I explore the area a little bit further, is that there are some practices where the education provided to the nurse in the clinic actually happened from the salesperson who gave them the BBL machine.
Yeah, look, that's very interesting, and I've actually been on the other end of that as well. And I can tell you now that the device manufacturers most certainly won't discuss the possible adverse outcomes with you. I've had experience where we were sold a machine that we were told would do a particular treatment, and after it was purchased, it didn't actually perform at all. I've had reps who have given me complete misinformation about machinery. So and accessories. So I had a rep who I said, we got a new laser, and I said, oh, these are really flash looking glasses. What are they made of? And he said, oh, they're made of titanium. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. Haven't heard of titanium before. After he left, I took the insert out of the box to have a look at what it was made of, and it was stainless steel. And I'm like, well, really? So you look, just be really discerning with where you invest your time. Like, money's a whole different ball game, but we're all living really frantic lives, and things are changing all the time, and we want to be investing in quality for time and money. So I would say, but just be really discerning about where you put your resources.
Certainly, so a word to the wise. There have been some very bad outcomes from dermatology and cosmetic practices because they listen to the rep as opposed to seeking their own knowledge or having staff with that knowledge before the application of the product. So.
Yeah. And some of those outcomes, Sue, can be catastrophic. They can be permanent, irreversible eye damage. They can be scarring, severe skin scarring. They can be lumpy dermal filler. They can be, critical vascular event after filler. These things are devastating for the patient and can ruin a career.
And certainly from the patient's point of view, there is an assumption in the community that if you're going to perform the procedure, then obviously you're a specialist. You know, you're not an 18-year-old girl that was employed 2 weeks ago and the dermal filler guy's shown you how to do it and now you're going to try.
Yes.
And that
Scary,
just
isn't it?
really freaks me out, because I'm thinking the reason that we exist as a profession and other professions are registered is to keep the public safe. But
That's
within
right.
this space, it's up to the clinicians to seek their own education, because there are companies out there who are, you know, their first line of business isn't keeping the public safe. It's to
sell machinery or sell
product.
product.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and registered nurses, enrolled nurses, nurse practitioners, we've got so much to protect with our registration. It's probably the most valuable thing that we have. And non-registered health professionals don't have that to lose. So they are, they're not risk averse like we are. And unfortunately, it's a really financially competitive space as well. So some quite underhanded things can happen in the pursuit of profit. And that's a really interesting thing for nurses to get their head around, is profits, business, and turnover. Yeah.
Certainly.
Sales. Yeah.
Well, Elisa, I look forward to your continuing influence in the space. And I also look forward to it becoming a recognised nursing specialty, because with that status then, you know, comes the opportunity to professionalise, you know, increase the professionalism of the area itself.
I couldn't agree more, and it gives nurses the certainty about the career pathway that they should be following. Having said that, can't do it on my own. So please be as engaged as you can in what's going on, whether you're new to the industry or you've been in it for a while. Please be engaged in the conversations. Please read documents that are for comment. Please, become active in the professional organisations, because it takes a village to raise a child. It's going to take all of us to progress this specialty that we're quite passionate about.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Elisa, for a great presentation.
You're welcome.
Today we've been listening to Elisa O'Keefe from Bravura Education, and I recommend her website to you. To everyone who's listening, I wish you an absolutely exceptional day, and I look forward to seeing you online at another webinar very soon. Goodbye.